Last time we were discussing one of the four aspects of yoga, which is known as Jnana Yoga. So we had an elaborate discussion on different aspects of Jnana Yoga. Today we will discuss Bhakti Yoga. Bhakti, well, in Sanskrit it means devotion. In English we can say it is a path of the spiritual path of devotion. These four yogas, as I said earlier, are formulated to suit the temperaments of different types of people who are active by nature, who are physically, intellectually and mentally active, can spiritualize their active habits and give a spiritual orientation to their active nature, and then the action itself becomes a tool in their hands to reach the highest spiritual goal. That's called Karma Yoga, as I said last time. Then there are people who are more of an introspective nature, who are rational, somewhat intellectual in their attitude. They rationalize, they analyze, they philosophize things and try to find out the fundamental cause of this existence. They try to think of the meaning of existence, the meaning of life, what exactly is the meaning of this world that we are living in, that we are experiencing, and what exactly is the ultimate goal of human life. Such rational people normally take to Jnana Yoga, the path of wisdom, intellectual analysis. And then there is a third one, it is called Raja Yoga, the path of psychic control, trying to control one's mind, emotions, tendencies, and ultimately reach a stage where mind is calm and quiet, and you transcend mind by going beyond the natural tendencies of the mind, like thinking, speculating, idealizing, and so on. I mean, they want to still their mind. And the fourth one is Bhakti Yoga, which I am going to deal with right now. Now, as I said earlier, Bhakti Yoga is what's called a path of spirituality through devotion. Generally, there are different methods prescribed by ancient sages to keep our mind on a higher level, higher transcendental level. Whenever we speak about religion and God, please, you have to keep in mind, please remember, here we are not talking about a well-defined, a well-structured concept of God as existing in different organized religions. That is included, but our idea of God in Vedantic tradition, in Bhakti Yoga tradition, goes far beyond that. By God we mean one supreme reality who is behind the whole existence, who is present everywhere, who is omnipresent, omniscient, and who is also the immanent reality residing in all beings. That's what we normally understand by God. This is a very important point to remember. Very often, if you read the history of different organized religions, so that Hinduism, Christianity, Judaism, any religion you find, there have been great mystics and sages, but there have been also people whom we cannot associate with much spirituality. So what we mean here is religion defined as spirituality. In fact, the founder of Ramakrishna Mission, of which this is a branch, defined religion as experience and spirituality and as the manifestation of our inner divinity that is immanent in all beings. Nothing more than that. Faith systems, rituals, going to a place of worship, following a set pattern of rituals, doctrines and dogmas, they do not constitute the whole of religion. They are relevant and meaningful only to the extent that they help us to go beyond them and to reach the realm of transcendental experience. In that sense, what we actually mean by the word religion is spirituality. And remember, what is spirituality? Spirituality is an inward growth. When we realize that there is the supreme reality, the divine principle, which is residing in all beings, not only in human beings, the entire creation. When we realize that this divine principle is present in us, then simultaneously we also realize that this immanent principle is also omnipresent. So the immanence of the divine reality and the omnipresence, that is the all-pervading nature of the supreme reality, these two realizations take place together. That's why great thinkers who defined religion as the highest transcendental intuitive experience said, the religion in its purest form is nothing but universal spirituality. And according to that religion, which is defined as realization of the supreme reality and realization of the fact that entire human creation is one spiritual family. According to that religion, God is omnipresent, immanent, and also transcendent. So this reality is what we mean by the word God. That point you have to remember. So this is what we have in mind when we talk about God in Bhakti Yoga. Now Bhakti Yoga is defined as constant remembrance of this inner reality, our true nature, which is in fact divinity itself. So according to Bhakti Yoga, God is not an extraterrestrial being. There is no such thing as God creating this world one day and then supervising this world and then conceiving human existence as a straight line progression, and many people going to heaven and many people going to hell. This is not the idea of God in Bhakti Yoga. In Bhakti Yoga, God is the embodiment of mercy, kindness, humanness, and He is open to all. God is merciful to you even if you do not believe in Him. Existence of God, as understood in Bhakti Yoga, doesn't depend upon your recognition that there is a God. You need not believe in God. Buddha did not believe in God. Perhaps one of the most spiritual human beings the world has seen. Buddha did not believe in God. But Mahavira, the founder of Jaina religion, did not believe in God. Confucius also was not what you call a conventional believer. Some of the greatest spiritual personalities the world has seen were not conventional believers in God. Buddha, of course, was an agnostic. He neither denied nor affirmed the existence of God. So, what we mean by God is the all-merciful merciful reality, who is open to all. He opens His doors to you even if you don't care for Him, but lead a good spiritual life, a human life. If you love, if you are broad-minded towards your fellow beings, then that is the greatest spirituality, and then God accepts you. God is not very sure, not very particular that you should accept Him. Don't accept Him but lead a good life, God accepts you. This is the idea of God in Bhakti Yoga. Of course, these ideas are expounded in number of ancient scriptures. I am not going to those details because those books are written in Sanskrit language. Now, according to this Bhakti Yoga, devotees are generally divided into 4 categories. There are those who seek God, they search for God because they have some problems, sickness, maybe some imperfection. So they pray to God, please answer my prayers, help me. Then there are people who want material welfare, prosperity, happiness in this world. They also seek God. There are people who are inquisitive. They also seek God. Then there are the highest seekers who are convinced that God is the only absolute supreme reality. So, Artho, Jijnasur, Artharthi, Jnani. I am not going into those details. This is the 4 categories into which seekers, spiritual seekers, are divided according to the Bhagavad Gita. Those who pray to God because they may be sick or they may be helpless. And then there are those who pray to God for material prosperity. They don't want anything else. They are not philosophers. They want money. They want to lead a happy life in this world. Then there are those who are inquisitive, intellectually oriented. Then there are those, the highest seekers. They are convinced that God is the only reality. So they want to realize the supreme reality. Now, according to Gita, all these categories of seekers have a place in God's realm, in God's empire. He doesn't reject those who are praying for material prosperity. But they do not belong to the highest category. The highest devotee is one who seeks God for his spiritual unfoldment, spiritual enlightenment. But others who belong to lower categories are also seekers and they are also noble-hearted. That's what the teacher of Gita says. Now what happens? Suppose you pray to God, you want something. If your prayer is sincere, if your heart is pure, if your mind is pure, and if you are fully surrendered, then God listens to your prayers. But if you are sincere, if you are pure-hearted, then what happens? Your prayers are answered, and when you achieve what you pray for, then you feel grateful. Oh, God has listened to my prayers. This sense of gratitude will make you pray to God even without any selfish motive. So first you may pray to God with a selfish motive. You want success, you want remedy for some of your problems, you want that you should be cured of your physical problems. Like that, people pray for different things. Well, if their prayer is sincere, then God listens to you, and then when the devotee feels that God listens to their prayers, God cares for them, this creates a sense of gratitude in the devotee's heart. Then that devotee of God starts praying for higher spiritual enlightenment, even without any selfish motive. Now here a question arises. Generally, in all devotional philosophies, there are 2 apparently conflicting ideas. You may have heard. One is human effort, the other is God's grace. What is the more relevant of the 2? Now, remember, we have to remember, we normally discuss Vedanta, but Vedanta also accepts the path of devotion as a sincere path leading to the ultimate reality. Now, non-dualistic philosophy doesn't deny the existence of a God with form, with attributes and characteristics. But non-dualistic philosophy tells you that beyond, there is a more complete picture of the reality beyond this. Advaita, also Vedanta philosophy, affirms, recognizes the path of devotion, but it also takes you to a higher level. Now, in this context, there are two apparently conflicting ideas. One, human effort. If everything is a result of our work, then where is God's place? When we talk about God, please remember, we are not talking about God as understood and defined and explained in any particular religion. That point should be kept in mind. When we talk about God, we are talking about a God who is present everywhere, who is the immanent principle existing in all beings, and who is all-pervading, and who is transcendent, who is merciful to all, who is not just a creator of this world. Creatorship is not the only way to understand the true nature of God. God is the immanent, omnipresent, transcendental reality present everywhere, and His doors are open even to those who do not recognize or accept Him, because He looks at your activities, behavior and character more than your profession or your confession of His or of your loyalty to Him. Now, as I said, these two conflicting ideas are there. One is human effort or God's grace. If God is merciful and if everything takes place by God's grace, then is there any place for our effort? Again, if human effort is supreme, then why should you affirm that God is merciful? Then man can achieve, a man or woman, a person can achieve whatever he or she wants, even without God's interference. So, if human effort is supreme, then we need not worry about God's grace. And again, if God's grace is supreme in everything, then human effort has no value. Now, the great spiritual thinkers and sages and philosophers of devotional philosophy, they try to reconcile these two ideas. Here, there is an interesting analogy given by Sri Ramakrishna Paramahamsa, who was the teacher of Swami Vivekananda. Somebody asked him some questions about the place of human effort and also the relevance of God's grace. Now, he tried to reconcile, he tried to answer this question on the basis of an analogy. Suppose you want to cross a river. You are sitting on the bank, on this bank of the river, and there is a boat which is tied to the anchor. Now, if you really want to cross the river, you have to untie the anchor. You untie the chain which binds the boat to the anchor. You have to break the chains which binds the boat to the anchor. Again, then you have to enter the boat, you have to row for some time, you have to reach the midstream, then only you can make proper use of the wind that is blowing in the river. If we just sit on one bank of the river and just say, I want to cross the river, it won't work. Because you will be able to make proper use of the wind that is blowing, the breeze that is flowing, only if you free the boat from this bond, from the anchor to which it is tied by a chain, and then if you row till you reach the midstream, you are able to get across the river, making use of the wind that is blowing. Now the wind that is blowing corresponds to God's grace. And your own effort, like untying the boat from the anchor, breaking the chains, and then rowing the boat to the midstream, that is human effort. So human effort and God's grace have equal place in the life of a devotee, according to devotional philosophy. Another very important analogy you find in the complete works of Saint Teresa of Avila. She was also a great mystic. She tries to reconcile the idea of highest devotion and human effort. You find in the lives of all great spiritual personalities who have gone beyond the artificial structures of dogmas and doctrines and conventions and rituals, and those who have reached the highest level of transcendental experience, those who have got a little bit of the intuitive spiritual experience, speak the same language. Because experience is the same. So in the complete works of Saint Teresa of Avila, you find a very beautiful reconciliation between human effort and God's grace. So she speaks of a farmer who is trying to irrigate his farmland, his fertile soil. There is a river nearby, and there is a well, there is a pond, and there are other sources of water. Now, how does a farmer bring water to his field? First, he has to make the field ready for irrigation. He has to remove the weeds, the unnecessary growth, which will, which will prevent the growth of food grain crops. So he has to remove the weeds, unnecessary grass, unnecessary growth from the field. He will have to remove all the pieces of stones and pebbles and make the field ready for irrigation. And when the farmer has made the field ready for irrigation, his own mind, field here means his own mind or her own mind, then what happens? The farmer will have to bring water from the river, from the pond, or from the well. He can use a water mill, he can dig a canal and bring water from the river, or he can perhaps bring water from a distant place on pots, which involves a lot of human effort. There are different methods of bringing water to the field. But before he starts irrigating the field, there is one important work. He has to make the field ready for irrigation. If he irrigates the field before the field is ready for irrigation, then what happens? Along with the food grains, weeds and grass also will grow. So he won't get a good harvest. So the mind should be ready. If mind is ready, then you can really understand the true relevance of God's grace. Now, this much about human effort. Then she refers to the place of divine grace, God's grace. As I said earlier, human effort corresponds to the farmer's efforts to bring water from the well, from the river, or from the pond, which all will involve a lot of effort. You have to dig a canal, you may have to use a water mill, and so on. But all these activities involve a lot of human effort, a lot of toil. But suppose the farmer has made ready his field. The field is ready. Suppose immediately starts raining. Then what happens? The field will be irrigated much better than in any other way. If he brings water from the river or a pond, the field can be somehow irrigated, but that won't be enough. But it will be irrigated very well if it rains immediately when the field is ready. Now, this is the place of God's grace. But human effort is necessary. That is, the farmer will have to remove the unnecessary growth, grass, weeds, and so on, pebbles and stones from the field. Field should be ready. So human effort is necessary. Because without human effort, we won't be able to understand the true importance of God's grace. If you sit somewhere and pray to God, God give me that. Even if God brings everything in front of you, you won't be able to recognize. So there is a story about one devotee prayed to God, God, please give me $1,000. If I'm walking through the streets, if I get $1,000, I shall give you $500. I shall donate $500 to church or whatever it is. And as he was walking, he got a bundle of notes, only $500. Then what he thought, oh God, you have taken your own share. You have given me only $500. So I need not give you anything. Then what happens? That devotee is not able to understand the true significance and worth of divine grace, God's grace. Because to be able to understand the true importance of God's grace, we must become worthy of grace. We must become grace-worthy. And this grace worthiness is achieved through our own effort by making our mind pure and simple. Another very striking example I can place before you. That is from the life of one sannyasi, monastic disciple of Sri Ramakrishna Paramahamsa, the teacher of Swami Vivekananda. He was a great monk. His name was Swami Brahmananda. He was a very great monk. He was always immersed in introspection, in meditation. That is nature. By his very nature, he was always immersed in meditation. But everybody knew that he was a highly elevated soul. He was highly enlightened soul, spiritually. He had reached a very high level of spiritual realization. But still, he was always engaged in different devotional practices, reading sacred books, doing japa, taking holy name, and meditation and so on. Normally, many of us believe that those who are highly spiritually evolved can just relax. They need not worry about anything. They can just lead a very happy life because they have reached the highest level of spirituality. There is no holiday in spiritual life. That is an important message given by the great philosophers of devotion philosophy. There is no holiday in spiritual life. Now, one of his disciples went and asked Brahmanandaji, asked him, his own disciples, Swamiji, why are you always engaged in japa and meditation? They used to call Maharaj. It's a traditional way of addressing a monk. Why are you always immersed in meditation, in spiritual practices? Just like any of us who are just seekers, just beginners. Because your great teacher, Sri Ramakrishna, had given you everything. He had taught you everything, and you also reached a very high level of spiritual enlightenment, realization. Still, you are always engaged in devotional practices, spiritual practices, like any of us, like the beginners. Then he gave a reply. Well, my teacher has given me everything, but what he has given me, I should make my own. Then only it will be useful to you. So what we get may not be ours. What we earn alone can be ours. In spiritual life, this is very important. Because when we become grace-worthy, when through our own effort we grow spiritually, we develop dispassion, we develop non-attachment towards worldly things, when we develop an introspective mind, and when naturally our mind goes towards higher spiritual thoughts, then spirituality becomes a reality for all of us. Then spirituality becomes an experience. So spirituality or religion is not dogma, doctrine, confession, faith, belief or anything, or ritual or anything. It is experience. So when we get that experience, then only we can really claim to be spiritual. So this great monk replied, he said, see, Sri Ramakrishna, his teacher, had given him everything. But to be able to understand what he has given me, to be able to digest, to be able to make it mine, I must practice. See, if something very heavy is placed on your hands, and if your hands are weak, that heavy object will fall down. You won't be able to hold it. But before you are given, your hands should be made strong and steady so that it will be able to hold it. Now, in devotional life, there are two ways of preparing our mind for the highest spiritual experience. One method is prescribed in Vedanta, another method is prescribed in yoga philosophy. In Vedanta, they prescribe 4 important prerequisites, called it characteristics, which are essential for anyone to be able to understand the true significance of God's grace. First, we must have a natural aversion towards unspiritual things. I mean, our minds should naturally move away from unspiritual things, things which are detrimental to a spiritual, ethical and moral life. And along with that, our mind should also develop a natural inclination towards spiritual ideas. It is not artificial, not prepared. Mind should develop a natural inclination to a spiritual idea. This is one important character. The first one. The second qualification is a devotee should be able to look upon spirituality, the spiritual life, as the most desirable, the highest goal that he should seek in his or her life. So first, there should be a natural disinclination towards unspiritual things and a natural inclination towards spiritual values. Second is, he should have no desire. And then the devotee should be able to completely turn his mind and actions of senses of action and perception towards spiritual ideas. For that, the most common and perhaps psychologically the most useful method which they prescribe is constant remembrance of the high spiritual idea. Constant remembrance. Constant remembrance can be achieved by reading, by renewing our contact with spiritual ideas, and by developing spiritual habits in our early years. Because once we succeed in developing spiritual characteristics during our formative years, it becomes a foundation of a strong character. if we could do that sometime in our spiritual life, that will work miracles sometime either in this life or next life. I already mentioned this earlier, in spiritual life, even if a little bit of spirituality that we practice in this life, sometime in this life, will bear its fruit. There is a famous story which demonstrates the importance of developing spiritual habits when we are young, and how those habits become helpful in spiritual life. There is a story in one of our devotional classics. A great devotee who had a very good upbringing. During his formative years, he was given good training by the parents. He led a very good ethical, moral, spiritual life. But when he became young, after reaching 19, 20 years, he had a deviation from his training, from the pattern of life that he was leading when he was young. He started leading a wayward life, almost indisciplined life, bohemian life. And till he reached a very old age, 80, 85 years old, he led a very bohemian life, most a licentious, indisciplined life. The story is given in one of our devotional classics called Bhagavata Purana. The story, the character's name is Ajamila. That name is not so very important. Now, just imagine, you have to remember the background. When he was very young, he had very good training, he led a very good life, his parents taught him, brought him up as a model, as a role model. But when he became young, he had a fall. He started leading a very wayward, indisciplined life. And when he reached his very old age, he felt that his end was coming. He was nearing his death. He had become an old man. So his mind was weak, senses were weak. So there was a dark shadow as he looked back towards his own past life. There was nothing but emptiness and darkness staring at him. He had a son. The son's name was Narayana, which is in Hindu tradition, which is one of the synonyms of God. It's one of the synonyms of God. That name was given to his son. So when he became helpless, when he felt that he was about to breathe his last, he called his son. And the son came to him. But as he called that name, he suddenly remembered that was the very name that he was reciting with great devotion when he was a small boy. Because that name is the name of Lord Vishnu. Narayana is a holy name in Hindu tradition. It's the name of Lord Vishnu. Means the name of God in Sanskrit, in the Vedanta tradition. So, remember, when the person reached the end of his life, he suddenly remembered that he was following the wrong track. And then, in utter helplessness, he called his son. The son came to him, but immediately he remembered that was the very name which he was uttering with great devotion, reciting with great devotion when he was a small boy. Every day morning he used to take bath in the river and chant this holy name in a most ritualistic way with great devotion. So, though he didn't mean that, he had forgotten all that he was taught when he was small. All those spiritual ideas had vanished from his mind. He was leading a very bohemian life. But when he felt that he was nearing his end, in a state of utter helplessness, he calls his son. And the son comes to him. And the son only heard his name. But for him it was different. Why? Because from the unconscious mind, the memory suddenly came to the surface. That was the very holy name that he was uttering, he was reciting, the great devotion. When every day, for years, he had to take bath in the river early in the morning, and after the bath, he had to sit and chant his holy name with a number of times. So suddenly, the idea of God came back to his mind. Now, here, this is the incident. Now, next mythology begins. That you need not worry. The story is explained in a mythological book. Mythology as mythology may be irrational, not acceptable, but the story has got a great spiritual message. It is said that God's messengers came to take his body or to claim his soul. Devil's messengers also came. So God's messengers drove away devil's messengers. This is a mythological story. That we need not worry. The point is this, psychologically the point is this. Because he was leading a pure life and he had practiced spirituality and devotion as a small boy, even that memory saved him at the end of his life. What does it show? So even if we practice a little bit of devotion when we are young, that will save us in spiritual life. In fact, in the Gita, in the 6th chapter, the disciple, Arjuna, puts one very important question before his teacher, Lord Krishna. A question is very, very rational. Lord Krishna was teaching high spiritual ideas, philosophical ideas to Arjuna. Devotion, the path of wisdom, the path of devotion, the path of morality, spirituality, and so on. Then Arjuna puts one question. Now, suppose a spiritual aspirant starts practicing all this, and if he doesn't succeed, if he suddenly gets a deviation, if he suddenly deviates from his spiritual life, what happens? Many people face that problem. And then they feel, well, I have already lost my track, this is the end of the road. Sometimes they turn bohemians, it happens. Or sometimes, and then Arjuna continues, if a spiritual seeker starts practicing spirituality and high ethical moral values, and then he dies before he realizes, he reaches his supreme goal, then what happens? Or if he deviates from that track, what happens? This is the question which Arjuna puts before Krishna. In the 6th chapter, Ayadi Shraddhayopedu Yoga Chalida Manasaha Aprapi Yoga Samsiddhim Kangidim Krishna Gekshadi Kachino Bhavi Brashta Chidna Parvivanasyadi. This is the question that he asks. Apradishto Mahabhavu Mudo Brahmanapati. I shall explain this. I quoted this verse in case some of you are interested. You can see the 6th chapter. The question is this. Lord Krishna, you have taught me all these spiritual values. But suppose I practice. Suppose somebody practices or tries to practice and then gets lost, falls by the wayside, fails and dies out. If a person, spiritual seeker, dies before accomplishing his goal, what happens? Don't you think his fate will be like the fate of a piece of cloud that gets separated from the mass of cloud floating in the sky? That's the poetical comparison. Say, piece of cloud that gets separated from the mass of moving cloud, it will be lost once for all. Like that, whole life will be lost. Whatever I have done will be lost. Now, Krishna gives a reply. It's a famous reply. And that reply contains a great promise, a great optimism. In fact, that is the uniqueness of Vedanta. The essence of Krishna's reply is this: you are absolutely wrong, you will not be lost. He says, even if you practice a little of devotion, little of spirituality in this life, even if you read a holy book for half an hour, or even if you think one holy spiritual thought for one split second, with all sincerity, that will remain in the spiritual deposits. Because life is not one. Life is not a straight line progression. It is like a wheel, cyclic progression. Even the little bit of spirituality that you practice in this life will become beneficial to you in the next life. Even a little concentration, meditation, or holy thoughts, sacred reading, or listening to spiritual ideas, if you practice in this life, that will remain in the mind. And then these thoughts will be transmitted into your next life. And in next life, whenever you get an opportunity to re-establish that link with spiritual ideas, again, if you get an opportunity to have any contact with such spiritual ideas in the next life, all these memories will come to your surface of the mind. That's how people get drawn to a spiritual idea. Sometimes you find many people, many spiritual seekers, if you analyze their previous life, if they had no opportunity to read Vedantic ideas or high spiritual ideas, but when they listen once, suddenly it's a whole set of memories come to the surface, and they start thinking, they start leading a new life. So Lord Krishna says, even if you practice a little spirituality, it will be beneficial to you. So you are never late, and whatever little you do will never be lost. It will be stored. Because whatever we do with sincerity and honesty will always remain as a spiritual deposit at the back of the mind. And if not in this life or next life, it will become beneficial to you. It will be a great source of strength and expectation. That's what really happens in spiritual life. So look at this person whose story we narrated, Ajamila. This person had practiced some spiritual values in his early life. Then he led a bohemian life. He forgot what he learned when he was a boy. All the benefits of his upbringing were apparently lost, But then, when he was about to breathe his last, suddenly he called not God's name, his son's name, whose name happened to be the same as one of the synonyms of God's name. And the moment he uttered, his intention was to call his son. But next moment his mind went back to his early days. Oh, this was the sacred name that I was reciting as a young boy. So mind suddenly took a quantum jump. It went back and it suddenly remembered what training it had received during his early days. And that saved his life. So this happens to many. In fact, this is one of the unique features of Vedanta. In fact, the devotional classic that I mentioned, that the whole classic was expounded as a response to a question posed by a great king who had only 7 days to live, 168 hours to live. A king who knew that he had only 168 hours to live, means only 7 days. He asked a question to a sage, what should a dying man do? And in response to this, the sage answers, he should be able to leave this world with God's name on his lips and holy thoughts in his mind. That is the reply which the sage gives. And how to do that? Either through karma yoga, bhakti yoga, jnana yoga, or any of these paths. Either by diverting our mind towards the path of devotion, or towards the path of wisdom, or towards the path of unselfish action, or towards the path of psychic control. Any of these paths will be equally valid. This is the uniqueness of Vedantic tradition. So one point we have to remember is, in Vedantic tradition or devotional tradition, whenever we speak about God, what we mean is not a monotheistic, uncompromising entity, but rather a supreme, all-merciful reality who is immanent, the immanent reality residing in all beings, with the all-pervading reality, with the transcendental reality. Not a founder of a religion, or the caretaker of a group of people who profess a religion. That God is accessible not only to believers but also to non-believers, because God's existence doesn't depend upon our belief in Him. Because our spiritual evolution depends upon our life, and the moment we are ready, God opens His doors in front of us. Second point is, whenever we talk about religion, we do not mean any of the conventional ritualistic religions, which is confined to a book, a place of worship, or an intermediary between man and God, or certain dogmas and doctrines. What we mean by religion is spirituality, inner spiritual growth. And as we turn our inquiry inward, as we grow spiritually, we experience the presence of the divine reality, divine principle within us. And along with that, we also experience the presence of that divine reality everywhere. So, a devotee becomes a universal spiritual person. This is the meaning in which we have to understand. Third point that we have to remember whenever we talk about devotional philosophy is this: life is not one. Life is eternal. Life is not just one road coming to a dead end. Even if we practice a little spirituality with sincerity and honesty, and then even by mistake, by fate, if we happen to forget it, it will not be lost. It will always be there to help us in times of crisis. So, even if a little spirituality we practice during younger days, it will help us in our old age. Even if little spirituality that we practice in our old age, still if we don't make much progress, it will not be lost. It will help us. It will come to our rescue in our next life. These are some of the fundamental points of Vedantic tradition. I have tried to outline a few important points. Now we will have an interaction for half an hour till 6:30. So you can suggest any topic for discussion, clarification. You can take.
What else? You describe here Bhakti Yoga and it related to the rebirth. We are born in that, you believe that, right? if they, and you also mentioned this religious and all those things, and inverts are not a particular thing like a religious thing. But in this world, some mainstream of religious group, some group does not believe the reincarnation, rebirth. What would be application about this?
You know, if you read the history of many of our religious traditions, there is ground to believe that many of these organized religions which today do not accept the idea of law of karma and law of rebirth did believe in these two doctrines. For example, the early Christians before the conversion of Constantine, the Roman emperor, who became a Christian in 305 around that time, Constantine, they believed in rebirth and law of karma. Aristotle, Socrates, in all pre-Christian Greek philosophers' ideas, you find Plato. Plato is a classic example. Plato clearly refers to the idea of law of karma and rebirth. The law of karma and rebirth, which were accepted doctrines in pre-Christian Greek thought, were later rejected by the theologians from 4th century onwards. It is well established. If you read history of ecclesiastical history of the church, you find law of karma and rebirth were accepted principles in pre-Christian Greek thought and also the early Christian theology. But now they don't believe. Of course, there are quite a few things which we may not profess or apparently affirm outwardly, but believe. In fact, these two are two such doctrines, which apparently we do not believe. Well, even if they don't believe, still it's applicable to them also. The reality doesn't depend upon our accepting it as such. If the reality doesn't depend upon our accepting it as such, they may not believe, but otherwise, how do you justify the idea that God creates His world and then one group of people moving towards heaven, another group of people moving towards hell, and those who go into hell are eternally damned? How can you reconcile the idea of God's mercifulness and compassion with this grim picture of eternal damnation and only one chance for you in life? Only one chance, and that is pure coincidence. Pure coincidence. How could you? The idea of God being all merciful, compassionate, and kind-hearted, and then the idea of the same God giving only one chance to humanity, and a group of people eternally damned, and other group of people admitted to heaven. No, it is not. It's not compatible with any kind of reason or logic. As we said, we cannot go back in time, but it is quite accepted it's an accepted fact among philosophers and historians of theology that pre-Constantine Church did accept rebirth and love karma, because the early Christian faith system was highly influenced by Buddhist doctrines, which have influenced Alexandria, Damascus, even before the birth of Jesus Christ.
But modern Islam does not believe.
Yes, no, there are. Well, we cannot discuss the subject because there are many who do not believe.
No, the point is here.
Everyone has that freedom to believe or not to believe. We cannot. So I won't stand in judgment of other people's right to believe or not to believe. But the point is, from a rational, logical point of view, we have more room to believe than to disbelieve in the law of karma and rebirth. Seems to be more rational otherwise. How do you justify certain inherent characteristics that we display in our life? Genetics? No, we cannot. Biological selection? No. But how do we justify the same parents may have 4 or 5 children with different characteristics? They may have identical upbringing, identical education, identical domestic conditions, still everything is different. It happens. How do you justify this? Again, there are certain things which are much more intimately experienced and felt than electricity or law of gravitation or law of relativity. But we cannot prove it in a laboratory or by using tools of science and technology. This is all we can say.
Thank you. So my background for the past few decades is more Buddhist, although I've been coming here for a long time, and anyway. So there's sort of 3 parts. People often ask, like at some of the satsangs, how can there be rebirth if there is no self? So maybe you don't want to talk about this, but another question people often ask is, why are some people suffering, some people poor and war, and
Yes.
is that their karma, is that were they bad in a past life? And that doesn't seem right to me. And then there's, I love the idea that any good I've done is not a waste. But a lot of people worry, like, what if I come back as a worm and all these things?
But I think that fear has no basis because, love karma and love rebirth should not make us helpless. It should not degenerate into fatalism. If our today's condition is the result of our yesterday's action, then our tomorrow will be the result of what we need today. So we can certainly do something positive and change our destiny. So our fate is in our own hands. That's what the real message of law of karma. Law of karma sometimes is very negatively interpreted as fatalism. So you are helpless in the hands of the mighty karma. But actually, if everything depends upon karma, we can rewrite our own destiny. We can do good things and we can improve our condition. In fact, Swami Vivekananda delivered a series of lectures just to emphasize this point. It's a very interesting. In fact, otherwise, Swamiji expounded the karma concept as found in the Gita, the 3rd chapter, Karma Yoga. But Swamiji emphasizes one point because over the centuries, karma theory came to be wrongly interpreted as fatalism, which makes you feel helpless. You are, he said in words, are you a tiny boat tossed about in the mighty waves of karma? See, Swamiji is in a very eloquent language, he asked this question. So, karma theory should make us feel like we are the masters of our own destiny, but not in an arrogant, egoistic manner. See, by doing good things, we can certainly build a bright future for us. Again, you are talking about soul. In Vedantic tradition, we think of soul manifesting in a body. Not body as having a soul, but soul accepting a body. So body vanishes, but soul in its subtle body aspect retains the essence of all its actions in this life. Otherwise, how do we justify certain inherent characteristics that we all display? We can't do certain things, and we do certain things. We can't help doing it in a different way. Now, how do you justify this? So, karma theory is one way of explaining. Perhaps if you have a better suggestion, it's all right. But this is one way of interpreting it. Because if there is an effect, it must have a cause. So what's the cause of this diversity, differences? So that's the idea behind it. Any other idea?
Yeah, she asked.
Would you just reiterate the 4 again? Karma, bhakti,
Yes.
and is it ajna?
I shall explain.
Okay.
There are 4 yogas. Yoga can be understood as a method or a means to evolve in spiritual life. Now, there are some people who are of an active nature, but they generally do their work with a strong motive, with strong purpose, with a strong identification with the work they are doing and also with the result of the work they are doing. Now, this work normally creates a lot of problems, anxiety, obsession and so on. The same work which creates problems can be turned into a tool, an instrument for our spiritual upliftment. If you do work in a most disinterested manner, without any selfish motive, as an act of worship to the Lord. So, in fact, its evolution is explained in this karma yoga aspect. It's explained. First, you look upon every work as worship. So, work as worship. And when you get established in this, so whatever we do, teaching, reading, writing, any work that we do, not necessarily spiritual or religious activities, any work, all this, you look upon all these activities as an act of worship. Every thought can be an act of meditation. Sadhguru established a link between our mind and spirituality, and also our deed with spirituality. And if we get established in this practice, then work becomes a worship, and ultimately everything becomes a worship. Worship alone, there is no work. For the most unevolved person, even worship is a big bother, a work. But for a highly evolved soul, every word is worship. Just the opposite. Even prayer can be a very boring, taxing effort if a spiritual aspirant doesn't have the necessary mental attitude. But prayer or any spiritual meditation will become a very laborious task. But for a highly evolved spiritual person, every act becomes worship. Every thought becomes a meditation. Whole life becomes spiritualized. This is the essence of karma yoga. The second one is jnana yoga. Jnana means wisdom. Now, in jnana yoga, we try to analyze the world in which we are living, and we try to find out the meaning of our existence, the final cause of this world, the meaning of our existence. And as we analyze, we can see that the world in which we are living is only a relative entity. It is not an absolute entity. Everything in this world is changing. Anything which is changing cannot be absolute. At the most, at the best, it could be only be relative. It is not an illusion, but it is relative. Means it is changing, not eternal. Now, what is the eternal reality behind this non-eternal phenomena? And this inquiry, when turned inward, becomes meditation. Through this meditation, we get the inner wisdom, the intuitive experience that the supreme reality that we are seeking outside is in fact the immanent reality within. And it is also the same reality which is the cause of the entire empirical world. This is Jnana Yoga. So the immanent and the omnipresent, the immanent reality within us and the all-pervading reality without are the same. And this is the Jnana Yoga, or the path of wisdom. The third one is Raja Yoga, which is based on Patanjali, the great psychologist, Patanjali's yoga philosophy. There, you are trying to analyze your mind. It's the path of psychic control. You are trying to still our mind by completely. We are trying to achieve the cessation of our thoughts and tendencies in mind becoming calm and quiet. The fourth one is Bhakti Yoga that we have already outlined. That's it.
What was the third one? The one right before Bhakti?
That is Raja Yoga. Raja Yoga.
Raja.
You find Patanjali's yoga philosophy?
Yeah. Okay.
Patanjali.
Yeah.
The essence is psychic control. So yoga is defined as cessation of tendencies and impressions within the mind. That's the fact. Tried through the path of meditation, inner and external disciplines, control and meditation.
So there's a thought that different types of people gravitate towards one of these more easily?
Yes, technically these four paths are meant for four different types of people with different temperaments. There are people who are more of a philosophically oriented type. They take this Jnana Yoga. Those who are they chant hymns in praise of the Lord. They pray to God, Bhakti Yoga. And there are people who are more of an active nature. Many who don't go to a place of worship, they don't necessarily believe in a God or anything, but they do good things. They are an active type. This is Karma Yoga. That is the Raja Yoga.
I was just curious how the practice of physical postures, like asanas, doing physical, like popular yoga, most people think of that word in this country. How does that fit in? Where does that?
Excuse me, ma'am?
Yoga.
Yes. No, I know, I understand it. Now, generally, the yoga that is being taught and practiced and trained in yoga institutes is only the physical exercise part of it. It is only a very minor part of Raja Yoga. In fact, the entire Raja Yoga is divided into 4 chapters with a number of pithy statements called suktas. There, Patanjali, the philosopher who expounds yoga philosophy, devotes only one statement to explain Hatha Yoga, the yogic exercise. He says, his statement is Sthira Sukhamasana. So, yogasana, the postures are only meant to help you to sit quiet in a relaxed mood for a long time. Because spiritual practice requires a lot of steadiness of posture. Posture, you should not move. You should be able to sit in the same posture with great concentration for a long time. For that you need a perfect body structure. Because any infirmity or complication, disease, any other problem related to body, will always try to drag the mind away from the object of meditation or concentration. Because when you sit, you should be able to go beyond body consciousness. So, body should be kept strong and healthy so that you should be able to sit in a very relaxed mood for a long time with perfect steadiness. For that, yoga postures are prescribed. But in later centuries, two great sages wrote two famous books, Gheranda Samhita and Hatha Yoga Pratipika. These are Sanskrit books, may belong to around 2nd and 3rd century BC, or according to some historians, maybe later centuries. So they wrote these books. In this book, they have outlined different postures, which later were developed by those who specialized in Hatha Yoga. And it has got only physical aspect. It will be helpful, but yoga philosophers always insist that one should have a perfect control over mind and thought currents before getting established before undertaking complicated yogic exercises. Any other? So before concluding, I want to make a few statements. Fort Mason.
Mm-hmm.
We are planning a series of talks in San Francisco, 10 talks at Fort Mason, beginning with the first one, that is on 15th January. So there yoga, philosophy, yoga, way of life, and all those ideas will be discussed. 15th January, Tuesday. Time?
7:30, I think.
7:30. You may get more information from our website in the coming days.
Will that be a weekly class then? 10 every Tuesday night for 10 weeks?
Yes, 10 weeks.
10 weeks
Weekly.
on Tuesdays.
From 15th onwards, for 10 weeks there will be.
One more class here.
Here, of course, there will be another class next Saturday. With that, we'll conclude the present series. And then we will have these classes in San Francisco, 15th January onwards.
What topic?
Yoga philosophy, yoga way of life. Two main streams, but we will divide each of these main streams into five subtopics.
Thank you for that.
Thank you. So thank you, Namaskar. We will have another class, the last one, next Saturday. So Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. All peace, peace, peace.